Hello YouTubers, this is Cessna Ace, back again with another video, a mega book ads video. As you can see, I have quite a backlog of books to show. I have a stack there, 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 and a stack there. Now obviously I'm not going to get to all of these in this one video, but never fear, I'm not going to do a part 2 immediately behind this video. What I don't get to in this video I will put aside and most probably continue to buy books, and I'll put those with the ones I don't get to in this video. I don't want to drive everyone away. I have plenty of other stuff that I can cover. A lot of CD ads, a lot of DVD ads, a ton of Laserdisc ads, not to mention homebrews for various consoles. Speaking of driving people away and not wishing to do so, if there is a problem with the audio, I apologize in advance. I know some of you are sick of hearing this, not any sicker than I am of saying it. But invariably, if I don't say anything, I'll have audio problems. But even if I do say something, I could spend 2 minutes talking about it. Someone will still leave a comment down below. Did you know you have a problem with your audio? Yes, I've tried everything. Various software solutions. I've replaced the web camera 3 times. Graphics card, the sound card, the computer in its entirety I've replaced. I've tried replacing everything except me, and that's not going to happen. So if there are any problems with the audio, I apologize, and if you stick around, I thank you for that, because I appreciate each and every one of my subscribers. Now, occasionally you'll see me, well, you won't see me do that. You don't see me do that. So I have to jiggle my wireless mouse every once in a while, so you don't disappear and I go, hey, where'd you go? My monitor will shut off. So occasionally I'll have to do like that. One of the longest running science fiction television series in the world, I believe, is Doctor Who. Originally it ran on the BBC for over 25 consecutive years. I believe it ran 26 years. Until someone at the BBC in their infinite wisdom canceled the series. They had been looking for an outside partner to produce the series, or co-produce the series with, at the time that they canceled Doctor Who. One of the companies that had approached them was Columbia Pictures, and for some reason that didn't happen, because the very next year they signed an agreement with the Fox Network in the US. The Fox Network jointly produced a made-for-TV movie that also served as a pilot for a new Doctor Who American-produced series. Partnership between the Fox Network, 20th Century Fox, Universal Studios, the BBC, and BBC Worldwide. It did well in the UK, ratings-wise. In the US, it didn't. Therefore, there was not a following or accompanying series. But sometime after that, and I can well imagine the conversation in my head that might have taken place at the BBC. Why are we letting the Americans mess this up? We could be doing that. So, Doctor Who came back. Bigger and better than ever. Much higher production quality standards, higher production standards. They're obviously spending a lot more money on the series. In fact, it's being produced now in, I believe it's 1080i, high definition, widescreen, whole 9 yards. So it's a really well done series. In fact, I believe the last 5 or 6 years, it has won the equivalent of an Emmy in England for Best Dramatic Series. 5 years. Maybe 6 years in a row. And they've won BAFTA Awards, which is the British equivalent of the Academy Awards. So, Doctor Who, very well thought of. Now, Speaking of the BBC and infinite wisdom, someone at the BBC in their infinite wisdom decided to destroy a lot of the early episodes of Doctor Who. 106 episodes, to be precise. Gone. Fortunately, they kept the scripts. Now, the same thing nearly happened with Monty Python's Flying Circus. The BBC had canceled the series, and they decided, in their infinite wisdom, to erase all the videotapes and recycle all the film that was used. All of the on-location footage was shot on film. All of Terry Gilliam's animation obviously was done on film. Fortunately, Terry Gilliam had a friend, I guess he still does, at the BBC who contacted him and let him know what was about to happen, and Gilliam was quick enough to get in touch with the BBC, and he paid them for every single one of the tapes, giving them enough money to buy a brand new tape for each one. And he bought all of the films. So I think they probably made more from him than they would have gotten recycling the film for the elements. But in any event, that's why they were going to recycle the films, because film elements were getting to be quite pricey. Anyway, speaking of the scripts for the destroyed episodes, the BBC licensed Target Books in England to novelize the scripts, which included the entire 26-year run. But it also included some radio dramas. In fact, they're still making Doctor Who radio dramas. Occasionally, the BBC will make a Star Wars radio drama. But anyway, these first few that I'm going to show you were already part of my collection, but I wanted to show them to make my point. This is one of the Target books, or as they're referred to, the Target range. No pun intended. Some of them are numbered, some of them aren't. This is number 66. I believe there are 139 or 140 in the series. I have all but 10. 9 or 10. Somewhere around there. But I have all the rest. There's the little Target symbol up there. You probably can't make that out with my dodgy camera. But it's a Target. The Target book range was Americanized for a while. There are about 9, 10 or 11. Somewhere around there. I think I have all of them. They were published by Pinnacle. These are for completists only because they were Americanized. For example, the spellings went from the British spellings to the American spellings. A friend of mine over in the UK, I haven't spoken to him in quite a while. I need to rectify that situation. SuperDan88. He's also a friend of mine on Facebook. We got into a rather heated but friendly discussion on Skype about differences in American spellings and British spellings. His position was that Americans were taking out U's unnecessarily. I played devil's advocate, and my the opinion that I staked out was that the U that the Americans took out of certain words were superfluous. They weren't needed. For example, the British spell color with a U. We don't. Labor with a U. We don't. Harbor with a U. We don't. Not sure about glamour. They do. Not sure if we do or not. I'm not the world's greatest speller, but anyway. After the Target range, they went with Virgin Books. Virgin Books published 2 different series. There were about 70 to 75 in each series that they published. One series was called The New Doctor Who Adventures. This stars, well, I'll refer to him as the Fox Doctor, the Doctor in the American made-for-TV movie. So I think he was the 9th. They were quite clever when they developed the series. It being a long-running series, obviously they were going to need to change actors for the Doctor on a regular basis. So what they did was they came up with the idea of the Doctor regenerating and kind of metamorphosing into the new actor. That's a list of the ones that have been published thus far at that point. Okay. They also published a series called Doctor Who: The Missing Adventures. This is how many they had done up to this point. These feature the previous 8 Doctors, and they jump around. They do a story with the 1st Doctor, then the 7th Doctor, then the 8th Doctor, then the 4th Doctor, then the 3rd Doctor, then the 8th Doctor, then the 1st Doctor, then the 8th Doctor, then the 2nd Doctor. Your head could explode. This one stars an original novel featuring the 4th Doctor, Romana, and K9, which I believe were the sidekicks for that Doctor. Usually when they replace the actor for the Doctor, they replace the sidekicks. After the 150 or so novels that Virgin published, BBC Books took over. When it was paperback, they continued what Virgin was doing with The Missing Adventures. This is another in the series of adventures for the 8th Doctor. 8th Doctor. Eighth Doctor. There's patience. This Doctor Who adventure features the 1st Doctor, Ian, Barbara, and Vicky. 8th Doctor. 8th Doctor. This adventure features the 1st Doctor and Ian, Barbara, and Vicky. This adventure features the 4th and 8th Doctors, Sarah, Jane, and Harry. Excuse me, everyone in my family came down with a bad head cold, and now they're over it, and then I got it, which is par for the course in our family. Please forgive. Okay, and finally, this is the novelization of BBCi's acclaimed animated Doctor Who adventure, first broadcast over the internet in November 2003, Scream of the Shalka. Now I'm going to get to the ones that I have added. If I mistakenly show you any that I had already shown you, well, it's either senility or cloning. Night of the Humans. Night of the Humans. I don't know which one is the clone and which one is the original. But they've been cloning themselves. The Glamour Chase. I know, glamour. It's like I have a lot of British DVDs. Region 2. PAL standard. I have a player that can play them. And the BBC and also Thames Television always say in color, spelled with a U. And the inside joke in my household, although my family is sick of it by now, is when that comes up, I'll say in color. I know, not funny. Touched by an angel, but then most of my humor's not funny. Don't want to insult any British people out there, but for a long time people were telling me that I have a very British sense of humor because it's very dry. One of the things I like about these BBC books is in the back they have page after page after page covering another story in the series. The author, title, synopsis of the story, all that. So it helps me to buy the ones I'm missing. Did I show this? I can't remember. Apollo 23. Houston, we have a problem. Then after they did these, they went to a smaller size, but still hardcovers. Sick Building. Now something they started doing with the hardcovers is they'll say who the actors are that play the characters. For example, this says featuring the Doctor and Martha as played by David Tennant and Freema Agyeman in the hit series from BBC Television. Sick Building. These are hard to track down at Books A Million or Barnes & Noble for that matter. Why? Because, and I've complained about this several times when I go in there, always friendly, very personable, I don't yell or anything like that. It does get frustrating sometimes though, because in the science fiction section they have an area devoted to Star Trek novels and they have an area devoted to Star Wars novels. The Doctor Who novels are not in the science fiction section. They are in the regular drama section, alphabetized by author. So I have taken to going to the help counter and saying, what Doctor Who's do you have in stock and where are they? Type, 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 type. And then I'll go and order a whole bunch that they don't have. Monsters Inside. The Price of Paradise. I want to fill all the holes in my Doctor Who collection, but there are a lot of Doctor Who's. The Clockwise Man. Now I have to look at this one 2 or 3 times because of the dyslexia. The Krillatane Storm. Autonomy. And finally for Doctor Who, Prisoner of the Daleks. Now, English language is a toss-up. Well, it's debatable on which series has the most novels, which series is going to wind up with the most novels. A lot of Doctor Who novels. A lot of Star Trek novels. Over 800. A lot of Star Wars novels. And it's getting to where they're publishing new Star Wars novels faster than they're publishing new Star Trek novels, although they're still publishing new Star Trek novels. One thing I wish the BBC did, or does, I wish they would do with Doctor Who, that they do with Star Wars now, is publish a timeline for the various novels. That would make things so much easier with Doctor Who. All the jumping around they did. First Doctor, 8th Doctor, 7th Doctor, 6th Doctor, 4th Doctor, 3rd Doctor, 2nd Doctor, 8th Doctor. I'm loopy enough as it is, and this head cold isn't helping, and the confusion factor on Doctor Who doesn't help. I know Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who aren't the biggest series. This is novel-wise, that would be Perry Roden, which is a German series. And in one video I mentioned they were well over 2,000 books in that series, and then someone from Germany contacted me and said, no. I don't recall whether it was nearly 3,000 or over 3,000, but they are publishing those weekly. And if I remember correctly, there was a second series that was telling stories that occurred in the timeline in the past. So, you know, they were publishing new stories that took place between novels or books that had already been published. So that aside, one a week, there's no way an American publisher or anyone could keep up if they were to publish them in English. And yes, I know Pocket Books tried. I have a lot of them. They got up to about 139, 140, somewhere around there, and they stopped. They started publishing them, the English translations, bi-monthly, and then they went monthly, and then they went bi-weekly. But they still weren't going to ever catch up with the German publisher publishing them weekly. It just wasn't going to happen. Did I show this? I don't even remember. I'm so loopy. I'll show it real fast. There we go. I think I did. An Imperial Command novel, 501st. BBC Books. How hard is it? How hard would it be? Star Wars, Darth Bane, Dynasty of Evil. This is one of the earliest in the timeline, I believe. See how handy timelines are? I am mistaken. This occurs 1,020 years before the events of Star Wars: A New Hope, but they have 4 books, the Lost Tribe of the Sith series, that runs between 5,000 and 5,033 years before Star Wars: A New Hope. Did I show that? I don't remember. I'm getting seen out. And it's time to blow my nose again. So once again, please forgive. But it must be done. If you think that's loud, you should hear the way my dad blows his nose. Finally, for Star Wars, Outbound Flight. Timothy Zahn, he was the one that restarted Star Wars, or I should say, started the whole Star Trek, Star Wars novels, the original novels. His first trilogy was simply called Star Wars Trilogy, but it was on the New York Times bestseller list for quite a while. And he has written quite a bit. And yes, there is a timeline. And I forgot to mention that many also include drawings. That's Kaleo. Now, I mentioned that I have dyslexia. It took me a long time to work out a system of getting around it. When I was growing up, I hated reading. Everyone in my family read a lot. My grandmother, who lived with us from the time I was 10 onward, when her husband died, my grandfather, she read Harlequins constantly. She was having them shipped to her, and I think she was getting every series that they were doing, and boxes and boxes and boxes, and she would read them as fast as they came in. My mom read murder mysteries. My dad read a lot. Both of my brothers read science fiction and fantasy and other things as well, but I didn't. The only thing I read that there were two books that I read back then that really had a profound effect on me. They were assigned reading. One was Diary of Anne Frank. That is a book that I have wound up reading 2 more times since the first time. So I've read it 3 times, and I've still got a copy of it. So it's always possible to read it a 4th time. But each time I read it, I'm at a different point in my life. I was in junior high, aka middle school, when I read it the first time, and then I was my senior year of high school the second time I read it, and then I was 36, almost 37 when I read it the 3rd time. My wife was expecting our first child, and of course, as a parent reading it, a totally different experience. The other book that had a profound effect on me was called Black Like Me, and I have never been able to find a copy of it since then. But it was written by a white journalist who traveled from one end of the USA to the other, talking about the lower 48. And then he underwent chemical treatments and so forth to where he was quite convincingly black. And then he retraced his steps. He went the exact same route, but the opposite direction. Experience was quite different. Remember, though, this was the 60s. That book was written in. But had a profound effect on me, and I could not put that book down, and I found it very disturbing. I have never, ever understood racial hatred or religious hatred. Any of that stuff. It's just, envy. I don't understand these things. Maybe I'm naive. I don't know. But I just don't understand them. They're developed a system, well, I came up with it, on how to read books, even though I'm dyslexic and have ADHD, although that wasn't diagnosed until I was 32. But what I started doing was, instead of reading a chapter and putting it down, and then a few months later picking up a book and reading a chapter and putting it down, I started reading a chapter or two, depending on how far I would get into it, and start to lose interest and patience. And I'd mark my place, and then I'd pick up a second book and do the same thing, and then I'd pick up a third and do the same thing, fourth, pick up a fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and I'd have 12 or 13 going. And I thought I was the only one doing that until I saw an interview some years ago. A British science fiction author, I don't remember his name, but he did the same thing. He read books the same way, and he usually had, he said, 14 to 15 books that he was reading at any one time. That's why in the past I've said I finish reading 3 books a week. I don't pick up a book and read it straight through, generally. But there are exceptions. One exception is Stephen King. I can pick up a Stephen King novel, even if it's 1,100 pages, and read it straight through. Not without a few breaks, but I don't feel the need to pick up another book to read to keep me interested in the interim. J.K. Rowling, the Harry Potter books, straight through. Australian author Trudy Cataban, who writes fantasy. I read her stuff straight through. Piers Anthony, fantasy author. I read his stuff straight through. But the first author that I found that I liked well enough to read straight through was when I was in my senior year of high school, and his books were all over the place in the school library, because at that time, you have to remember, in the 60s and 70s and early 80s, if you read science fiction, you read this author. If you didn't read this author, you weren't reading science fiction. The two were intertwined. It was to the point where if you went to a grocery store, or you went to a convenience store, or you went anywhere that sold books, some of his books would be there. And if you went to a bookstore, they had a huge section devoted to this author. Unfortunately, after he died, his books fell out of favor with the masses, I'll say that, but he still has a loyal following. When I was in my senior year of high school, I believe it was, or just after I graduated, but it must have been during my senior year, I was reading everything I could by this author, and I was watching one of my favorite television stations in the Seattle area. It was an independent that served both Seattle and Tacoma. And they ran a lot of science fiction. They ran Star Trek. They ran UFO. They ran Space 1999, and it was still a current series then, although it was wrapping up the second year. I don't remember which show this commercial ran in, but it must have been the original Star Trek series. But it was a commercial for a Star Trek convention. You have to remember, back then, Star Trek conventions were fairly new. They had started around 72 or 73. So only about 4 or 5 years prior to this, they had started. It was a commercial for a Star Trek convention that was coming to the Seattle area. And write them for information, and please list your 10 favorite episodes of Star Trek, and they would book film prints of the 10 most popular by the vote tally, and they would show those off of 60mm. I think I'm repeating myself. Well, I sent a letter. Now, I have a talent. I don't know what it is about. I guess you could say it's a talent. But my cover letters, whenever I send cover letters to anybody, to a celebrity or whatever, I get a response, a personal response. Whenever I've contacted celebrities, I've always gotten a personal reply back. This has included supermodels, actors, directors, musicians, the whole 9 yards. Whenever I write a letter to an editor of a magazine, and it's only happened about 5 times, it's always published, except for one time. That magazine editor could not be pleased doing that, or it was a lame letter. But in any event, I sent a letter, and then some time passed and the phone rang, and I was still in high school. I was still living at home. And I heard my mom pick it up, and she said, "Mark, it's for you." And I was kind of shocked because I rarely got phone calls. And I said, "Well, who is it?" And she said she didn't know it was a girl. And that happened even less frequently. So I answered the phone, and it turned out she was a member of the organizing committee of that Star Trek convention that was coming. And we talked for hours, and she would call back, and we would talk for hours. And this went on 4 or 5 times where she would call me, or I would call her, and we would talk for hours and hours. And on one of those conversations, she asked me, "Mark, we've got a meeting coming up of the organizing committee, and would you like to come? We would love your input." So I've been talking with the other members of the committee, and I said, "Great, I'd love to." So I drove to downtown Seattle. I don't remember exactly where the meeting took place, in somebody's apartment. And everyone was in a circle, sitting in a circle. We introduced each other because I was new there. And they asked for suggestions, who to book for this convention. William Shatner, can't afford him. Leonard Nimoy, can't afford him. DeForest Kelley, can't afford him. And they were going around, and they hit me. And I said, "I think we should invite authors. Harlan Ellison, David Gerrold. They're no-brainers because they wrote episodes for Star Trek. But especially Robert A. Heinlein, because he has had such an impact on me. I have developed such a love for reading, and it's because of Robert A. Heinlein. This is obviously a regret. I used to have this novel in the past, though. I've read all of his novels, so I've owned all of them at some point in my life. I heard him speak, because he did come. I heard Harlan Ellison speak. He's a trip. I've heard David Gerrold speak. We also had Jimmy Doohan, and I was so close to Jimmy Doohan, I could reach out and touch him if I wanted to. In later years, I would work Star Trek conventions in exchange for a free pass on one day. And that's how I became, well, a bodyguard for Marina Sirtis, Counselor Troy on Star Trek The Next Generation. And everybody said I had such a grin on my face standing behind her. And I remember one of the organizers came up to me and whispered in my ear, "Marina has an important phone call. She needs to take it." And so I had to lean over and whisper in her ear that she had a phone call. Anyway, one of my many brushes with greatness, which I thought about doing a TV series, video series on that, and nothing has come of that. This was originally published in 1949, but this is the original version he submitted to Scribner's. They were well named because their editor scribbled all over his submission and deleted a lot of stuff. Including the entire ending that he had written. But it's back in this book. And I have in hardcover unexpurgated edition of Stranger in a Strange Land, his classic novel. And it had been fully restored to what he had submitted to the editor to begin with, not what was published after the editor got done with it. And that version runs over 1,100 pages. But I was able to read it straight through. Not without breaks, but I didn't have to pick up something else and read it. Richard Matheson and Star Trek and everything else will have to wait until a future video, because I have reached that point where a lot of you, if this does have sound problems, and even if it doesn't, have said, okay, enough of this guy, I'm going on to something else. I'm going to listen to some Abba or whatever. Until next time, stay awesome.